Russian Chechen relations are reaching an ever more hopeless impasse. They are increasingly being used to promote the theme of so-called Islamic terrorism, the coverage of which in the mass media is often accompanied by the screen text of the Quran.
Bloody strifes on the territory of Russia, as well as in other regions of the globe, have nothing to do with the Quran. Attempts to link the ideology of terrorists with the Quranic teachings are a crude, blatant provocation designed for those who have never read the Quran and do not know the essence of the information it contains. On the contrary, in our opinion, it is precisely the study of the Quran, the correct interpretation and implementation of its ideas into the life practice of our peoples, both Russian and Chechen, that can stop this conflict.
We will talk about the substantive side of your proposal, but it seems to me that you are setting an obviously unrealizable task, because Christian traditions, the traditions of our fathers and grandfathers, dominate in Russia.
You know, one of the Quranic truths states, I quote, God changeth not the condition of a folk until they first change what is in their hearts. This wisest, key idea for our program is stated in Surah 13, verse 11. It is impossible to change something to get the wanted result without changing anything. Therefore, if we really want to end the bloodshed, then we cannot be marginal people. People who have limited their worldview understandings to certain, albeit recognized by everyone, dogmas and traditions, are not calling for changing anything at the level of faith. The time has come to understand the essence of the Quran at the level of reasoning. Today, in non-Islamic zones, a thoughtlessly negative attitude towards the Quran prevails, often deliberately formed and deeply erroneous.
I think I agree with you regarding the absence of any clear views about the essence of the Quran, about the history of its appearance. Could we fill this gap with you in a very short form?
The Quran means reading. According to the Muslim tradition, such reading was started by illiterate Muhammad at the age of 40, when in a dream someone appeared to him with a book wrapped in a brocade blanket and demanded, "Read." In response to Muhammad's remark that he could not read, words were voiced in his head that he simply repeated. He voiced such divine revelation sent to him from above from the years 610 to 632, and their lifetime recording was carried out by many of his contemporaries. The generalizations of these records are the Quran, rewritten by the scribe Zaid in 4 copies that have survived to this day. Mecca, the home city of Muhammad, was at that time an important trade and religious center. There lived those who professed Christianity, Judaism, and the so-called Hanifs lived there, who rejected polytheism. They were out-of-confessional believers in one God. As for the theological essence of Muhammad's sermons, he maintained that God is one for Jews, Christians, and for all humanity. Let us illustrate this with a quote from Surah 29, verse 46. We believe in that which has been revealed to us, i.e. through Muhammad, and revealed unto you, i.e. through Jesus and Moses. Our God and your God is one, and unto him we surrender. Throughout the whole of the Quran, there is a thread of the deepest respect and sympathy for the prophets who had come before, Moses, Jesus, and many others. The Quran condemns the persecution of them and the perversion of their teachings. Muhammad showed that the new teaching, as if destroying and rejecting the faith of the fathers, is the true, uncorrupted faith of the forefathers. Starting the reading of the Quran, Muhammad believed that the Jews and Christians would accept this information with gratitude and joy, since it simply eliminated the errors and distortions introduced by the earthly church hierarchies into the true revelations of Moses and Jesus. However, the rejection of these perversions was not included in the plans of those who introduced them deliberately in the name of enslavement over countries and peoples, bypassing consciousness. For example, the Nicaean Creed, adopted in 325, was a self-concoction of church hierarchs that did not contain a word from the prophecy of Jesus Christ. And Christ himself, contrary to healthy thinking, was recognized as a god, as a result of a majority of votes.
But what grounds do you have to speak about the divinity of Muhammad's revelations?
If you read the Quran in detail, you cannot fail to notice that it contains such deep thoughts. It is simply impossible to believe in their earthly origin in the 7th century, especially since they were voiced by an illiterate person. Let us read Surah 41, clear in exposition, Ayat 12. Then he ordained them 7 heavens in 2 days, and inspired in each heaven its mandate. And we decked the nether heaven with lamps and rendered it inviolable. That is the measuring of the mighty, the knower. But it was only in the 20th century that it was scientifically established that the Earth's atmosphere consists of 7 layers of different quality, from the troposphere to the exosphere. Moreover, each of them has its own, strictly individual, mandate in preserving life on Earth. Any failure to fulfill these mandates can cause catastrophic consequences similar to those prognosed in case of a violation of the ozonosphere. The currently developed scientific versions of the origin of iron on Earth are reflected in Surah 57, the iron. The role of wind and the nature of rains are reflected in Surah 15, Al-Hijr, the rock. The role of mountains as a kind of nails in stabilizing the Earth's crust is reflected in Surah 78, the tidings, and Surah 21, the prophets. Surah 2, 275 gives an idea of usury as the root of evil in the economy, which is not comprehended by the countless army of financiers with degrees and diplomas. Surah 5 gives deep ideas about monotheism, prophets, malicious distortions of revelations from above by earthly hierarchies. The ideology of the Quran is the ideology of the highest raviousness, condemning parasitism on other people's labor, corruption of people with alcohol and other types of genetic weapons, as well as gambling, debauchery. The Quran condemns any kind of violence, except for the holy protection of one's own kind, one's own people, from hostile encroachments. The current understanding of jihad has nothing to do with the holy war for previousness, which is spoken of in the Quran.
But why is there no such interpretation of the Quran in our society?
For this, numerous schemes have been invented to block the true understanding of the Quran for the Russian-speaking reader. Everything starts already at the stage of translation. It is no coincidence that Pushkin called translators relay horses of enlightenment. In the first translations of the Quran into various languages, the Arabic word Allah was translated as God. However, later they deliberately began to leave it in the Arabic sound without translation, thereby creating the impression that Muslims are not talking about one God for all, but about some kind of their own God. After all, if the peoples understand that God is one, then difficulties will arise for those financial clans that in the name of selfish interests are engaged in the purposeful playing of peoples against one another according to the principle divide and conquer. After all, it is they who, having planted their god doll to each people, organize military conflicts around the globe, Chechnya, Karabakh, Afghanistan, Yugoslavia, etc. So that the holisticness of the Quran is not comprehended, the order of the surahs of the Quran has been changed beyond recognition in relation to the one in which they were revealed to Muhammad. They are arranged in decreasing order of their volume. Surah 2 is the longest, the third one is shorter, and so on. As a result, the first surah turned out to be the 96th, the second the 74th, and the third the 111th. Try to understand the meaning of even a fictional story consisting of 114 chapters scattered in random sequence, to say nothing of a holistic worldview work. The Quran, unlike the Bible, is revealed in a form that is protected from distortion. Everything is strictly numbered, and each verse has the rhythm of a blank verse. You can't even throw a word out of the Quran. The Bible is rewritten many times in whole chapters, and all its written sources, dated before the Nicaean Council, are absent. After reading the Quran, it becomes clear that all the absurdities of historical Islam are connected with its departure from the Quranic truths. And everything that happens in Chechnya, from beginning to end, fundamentally contradicts the Quranic teachings. All the roots of extremism are rooted not in religion, and not even in the Quran, but in rough politics that tramples on the Quran and is implicated in bloody profits and plundering.
But why did the civilization, which received the Quranic revelations, and then the text of the Quran, not follow the scheme of crisis-free development, and is in a severe system crisis?
Answering this question, we must first of all recognize that the essence of religion is in the real presence of a reciprocal connection between man and God, and not in the presence of a holy scripture lying in a place of honor. The teaching of Muhammad is indeed a revelation, but it is free from possessions in precisely that measure that the psyche of Muhammad himself was free of them. And this revelation was given in relation to the concrete historical conditions of his era. If everything had been conditioned by the infallibility of Scripture itself, then apparently Muhammad could have set himself the objective and left behind a primary writing of the Quran, on which all the efforts of the followers of Muhammad would be focused. However, the activity of any prophet is valuable, first of all, as an illustration of the algorithmics of the interaction of man with God. For any person is able to repeat a prophet's experience to one degree or another, realizing his mission of messenger in relation to other people. God led and leads every person along the path of life, but this is realized according to the person's world understanding, his sovest, his nraviousness, but not to the text that he reads and the rituals that he performs. Any scripture can, if desired, both be understood and interpreted, adapting it to the needs of the interpreter, to his worldview and nraviousness. This is exactly what happens in the historically formed Islam, which has departed from the life practice of Muhammad, and which has lost faith according to sovest, in favor of thoughtlessly quoting the Holy Scriptures and worshipping a prayer rug. In the analysis of the global history of humanity since the time of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten Amenhotep IV, 1375 to 1358 BC, leads to the conclusion about the dual mission of prophets, starting with Moses. The Jretzud of the Amun hierarchy, having turned into a pseudo-Jretzud, could not hide the idea of monotheism from humanity, which they put under their control, and they acted according to the principle, if you cannot counteract, then you must head the structure and lead it down the wrong path. As a result, the cult of monotheism of Akhenaten, pagan Rus, differs from the monotheism on the basis of the Bible and the Quran. The Bible and the Quran are malintendedly united in intimidating everyone with hell. Everyone who does not recognize the divine origin of the Bible and the Quran, and who manifest their will and their own world understanding instead of the unconditionally and thoughtless following of the dogmas of faith. The presence of hell and heaven seems to be extremely unmerciful and unworthy in relation to the divine will, when from the very beginning certain production wastes are predetermined, doomed to endless torment. In contrast to these beliefs, the Rus civilization, before its baptism, did not include the teachings of eternal hell and heaven. Such a worldview made people free from moral terror and outright bribery, as they carried out their endeavors from the call of their souls, but not out of fear or for the sake of expected reward. The dual nature of the officially proclaimed prophets was vividly revealed by A.S. Pushkin in Gavriliad. Only those are proclaimed as prophets who, having a submissive mind, were able to counteract the inscription of themselves into the scenario alien to God's providence of the pseudo-Jretzes of Amun. Hist! Unlike the tales of Moses, mine's no error. To flatter your Jehovah, I am not bought. To tell tall lies, poor Jews to keep in terror. Moses was paid well for his sycophancy, but I'm no fake seer, nor smug history Nancy. The conducted analysis of the correlation between the Holy Scriptures and life practice enables us to conclude that the exhaustion of the Russian Chechen conflict lies in the plane of changes in the currently dominant social nraviousness.
Viktor Alexeyevich, I think the excursion into the Quran was very interesting to our radio listeners. But do I understand correctly that on the basis of this information, we will come to the well-known thought that terrorists have nothing to do with faith or nationality?
No, I do not agree with this now officially stamped approach. It is oriented not so much on understanding what is happening in essence, as on good intentions, to prevent the incitement of ethnic hatred. We must agree with the generally accepted opinion of ordinary people that organized crime and terrorism have a specific national coloration in Russia. These criminal statistics express the persisting family-line tribal lifestyle of certain regions of Russia and the accompanying clan principles of collective complicity in one crime on the basis of blood or spiritual kinship. Without changes in the way of life, the fight against such crime is effective if not only the younger generations, but also the elders in the hierarchy of clan relations are automatically responsible for the crimes of the younger ones.
In what do you see the origins of the Russian Chechen confrontation?
From the moment of the entry of Chechnya into the Russian Empire, our peoples have stood at different stages of social development. The mountain peoples lived in a family-line tribal system that allowed direct slavery. Social nraviousness in Chechnya is such that to this day it allows the turning of both its poor people and captured prisoners into slaves, keeping them in chains in special cells for slaves, zindans, and taking them out with the same chains for hard labor. Russia lived in a strata caste system in which slavery was realized in a veiled form, in the form of serfdom. At the same time, Russia, through a thorny path, through gross, tragic mistakes, taking the bait of provocations such as Marxism, has always looked for a way to eliminate slavery, a way to previousness, a way to eliminate the parasitism of some on the work and life of others. The events of the 1990s were a step back in this regard. They brought democratizers to the Kremlin, implementing the most sophisticated schemes of global slavery. If in Chechnya the surviving slavery was personified and affected specific people, then in Russia a scheme was applied in which every one of the participants in socially useful creative labor fell into unconscious slavery, with a noose of a tie around his neck instead of chains. This slavery is being realized by the global usurious banking clans and their governorial periphery, the newly minted usurious and financial intermediary punks of Russia. The profitability on loan interest, in insane plundering values from 210 to 21% per year, was many times higher than the theoretically possible profitability in production, ruining all its participants without exception. Prosperity in today's Russia is possible so far only in those spheres of activity that are socially harmful. Directing of resources to the West, alcohol, tobacco and other types of genetic weapons, or socially useless, currency exchange, stock and financial transactions, and so on. Those carrying out antisocial activities luxuriate on the legalized plunder of natural resources belonging to the entire people, on the plunder of the participants in productive labor and the service sector doomed to a miserable existence. Therefore, if, following the advice of Kosma Prutkov, to behold the root, then we must admit that Chechnya is right in resisting the Kremlin in establishing a regime of slavery in the sophisticated form of usurious racism. The anti-human nature of this slavery is angrily condemned by the Quran, Surah 2, Ayah 275. The bloody massacre began in revenge after the state authorities of Chechnya opposed the anti-people clique, supported the State Committee on the State of Emergency, in fact, the unity of the USSR. The trouble with this government is that it was baited by a provocation, did not consider the mechanism of the State Committee on the State Emergency as a performance, pre-planned and orchestrated by the owners of the democratizers. At the same time, in suppressing archaic slavery inside Chechnya, the Kremlin is also no doubt right. The Chechen elders, hiding behind their love of freedom, did not oppose when the robbery of transit trains in Chechnya became a folk business. They did not oppose the flourishing of financial swindlers on Chechen banking remittance advice letters. We also did not hear that the deputies of Chechnya in the State Duma were fighting against usurious slavery in Russia. So the Russian Chechen conflict is a struggle between the elites of these two sides for the right to implement their own way of slavery. While maintaining the worldview standards of slavery, this conflict is, in principle, unsolvable, and nobody is right in this conflict. It is beneficial to the global financial and usurious clans, and the flames will be fanned and governed by them exactly as long as the world behind the scenes needs, or until the world behind the scenes is cut off from governance by the taking shape in Russia autocracy.
So, what is the scheme for overcoming the Russian Chechen conflict concluded in?
An effective exhaustion of the conflict is possible only on the path of overcoming any diverse slavery in all its forms and manifestations. It is impossible relying on one evil to defeat another evil. The ancient Buddhist wisdom says, conquer badness with goodness, conquer meanness with generosity, conquer dishonesty with truth. The President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, who, in connection with the events in Moscow, raised the question of the working out of new principles of the conception of national safety, although in our multinational state it would be more correct to talk about the conception of social safety. The time has come to abandon many of the traditions of the fathers in order to recall the traditions of the forefathers. In ancient Rus, captive nomad inhabitants were taken into the depths of the territory. They were given land, and after 1 or 2 generations they became Russians, enriching the culture of Rus with some originality of their own. It was in these wisest traditions, with the aim of destroying the family line tribal structure inclined to slavery, that in 1944, striving for the autocracy of our state, J.V. Stalin carried out the resettlement of part of the mountain peoples from their historical homeland. Trotskyist Nikita Khrushchev interrupted this process before it entered the stage of irreversibility. Since the time of Peter I, Russia has been living in a destructive shortage of state apparatus of cadres, whose, first of all, nravious, worldview, professional qualities would meet the needs and wants of ordinary people, the needs of ensuring a strategy of crisis-free social development. In the name of resolving this problem, in the country a fundamentally new, outside of elite, cadres-based preparation has been ongoing for more than 10 years. This preparation takes place within the framework of a social initiative based on the worked-out conception of social safety, dead water, the basis of which is the dialectics of God's providence, the sufficiently general theory of governance. To realize the intention of a previous life arrangement, the conceptual party Unity was created, registered by the Ministry of Justice on September 24, 2002, and it has branches in 60 regions of Russia. Our cause is right, the enemy will be defeated, victory will be ours, since we will receive the support of both the Russian and Chechen, as well as many other peoples of the civilization of Russia. Only in this case will the problem of Russian-Chechen relations be resolved as if by itself, within the framework of a new, previous worldview that excludes any varieties of slave-serf relations, when in Russia and Chechnya, society itself will actively take up for the right cause, for social previousness, the cause which will grow and bring up such a new government with which our peoples would be happy.